Hi, this is Peter Schiff. This is Friday, June 26, 2009. Well, the dollar was weak again today. We had some statements coming out of China regarding potential alternatives to the dollar as a reserve currency again, talking about the IMF. Sent the dollar lower. Cash dollar index once again closed below 80. I think it's looking very, very weak. And of course, I think all the talk about a new global reserve currency is actually misplaced. I don't think that's going to happen. Before the dollar was the reserve currency, central banks held gold as reserves. And the only reason the dollar became the reserve currency was because it was backed by gold and redeemable in gold. Now, once we reneged on those promises in 1971, the reasons for adopting the dollar as a reserve currency no longer existed. So I think it's more likely that the world will simply go back to the reserves that were in place prior to the dollar standard, not simply look for another fiat currency to replace the one that has already failed. Also, today you had an op-ed in the Financial Times by Alan Greenspan, in which Alan Greenspan is warning about inflation and rather substantial inflation in the years ahead. Well, he ought to know he helped create it. And I think, to try to deny his own role is disingenuous at best and just outright lies. But of course, if you read that op-ed, and I put it up on my website at Europac.net, most of what he's saying is true. The only thing is he's saying that we're not going to see the effects of inflation until maybe 2012. I think he's wrong there. I think we're going to see it a lot sooner. And what he's saying is if the government isn't able to sterilize this or have an exit strategy when inflation starts to pick up, or the situation turns around, that we're going to have a big problem. Well, I don't think it's a question of if. They're not going to be able to do it. They've already polished the bottle. The genie is going to come out. There's no way to get her back in. And a lot of this, of course, is because Ben Bernanke is simply following in the footsteps of his predecessor, Alan Greenspan. Greenspan blazed the trail to inflation. Ben Bernanke is simply following. Also today, we got the House voting on cap and trade. And this is a disaster. Even if we had a sound economy and we could afford this nonsense, we shouldn't do it. But considering the state that we're in, the fact that our leaders could be so stupid and so irresponsible as to burden the economy with more regulation and more taxes, now when it's in so much trouble, we need all the help we can get. We need to utilize our resources as efficiently and effectively as possible. The last thing we need is more government interference, and this is not going to help the environment. This is all a liberal fantasy. This is a tax hike disguised as environmental policy. But that's what it is. And a lot of the money from the tax is going to be doled out to special interests that are keeping our elected officials in office. It's a huge tax. It's going to make American business less productive than it already is. And of course, the cost is going to be borne by American citizens in the form of higher prices and ultimately higher inflation. Now, also, I was on the Glenn Beck show the other day, and I've been reading these articles too. And Glenn was talking before I did about this Governor Sanford and his infidelity. And what irks me about it is him because of his criticism of Bill Clinton and what happened with Monica Lewinsky, trying to say that he's a hypocrite. And I'm not, trying to condone infidelity or whatever he's done. I mean, it's obviously, a bad thing, but I don't think it's arises to the level of Clinton. Because remember, Bill Clinton had an affair with his intern in the White House, in the Oval Office. That's the same thing with having an affair with a consenting adult that you don't have, that doesn't work for you in Argentina. I mean, he opened us up to a potential sexual harassment suit. He disrespected the office, the White House, and then he lied about it under oath. And so, there's a lot more to what Bill Clinton did than just cheating on his wife. But the media, I think, is trying to jump on this to try to label a lot of the Republicans who criticized Bill Clinton as being hypocrites. And I certainly, if they were, just focusing on the infidelity part, that'd be one thing. But they're not. It made me think when I was watching Ben Bernanke the other day testifying about his role in the Merrill Lynch Bank of America deal. A couple of times he answered questions I don't remember. And it was almost shocking because there are certain things that you remember. And I was thinking about, Bill Clinton, if somebody had asked him, well, Mr. Clinton, did you have sex with Monica Lewinsky? What if he had answered, I don't remember? I mean, there's certain events that are very memorable. You don't forget them. I mean, is it possible that he could have had sex with so many interns that he forgot which one? I don't think so. I don't think that Ben Bernanke was involved in a conversation like that, where he is twisting the arm, trying to get Bank of America to agree to buy a bankrupt Merrill Lynch and defraud their shareholders. Whether he, did that or not, there's no way that it's immemorable. Either he remembers it or he doesn't remember it. I think this idea that he doesn't remember it is just a farce. In fact, a couple of times I'm watching and I'm waiting for Ben Bernanke to plead the fifth. Anyway, also, I want to point out, I happen to notice, and I'm sure it's my fault, that on my last video blog, I referenced David Faber's book about the crash. And, initially I said I didn't want to take anything away from David. David's a journalist. He's a reporter, right? He writes about things that have already happened. I'm a forecaster, an economist. I write about things that are going to happen. I'm not trying to criticize his book. And I don't like the fact that a lot of people went on Amazon and decided to put up a 1-star review, even though they hadn't even read the book. And many of the 1-star reviews specifically referenced me. And I don't think that's fair. I mean, if you read the book and you really don't like it and you want to give it a 1 star, all right. But don't just give it a 1 star because of something I said or because, you don't like him. I mean, that happens to me once in a while. I mean, I have my fans, but I also have my critics. Sometimes I go on Amazon and someone gives my book 1 star and they haven't even read it. They just don't like me, so they want to put a 1-star review on my book. And I don't think it's fair when it happens to me, and I don't think it's fair for anybody to do it to Faber. So if anybody is listening to this and you put up one of these 1-star reviews, I think it would be fair to take it down and actually read the book. And if you don't like it, then say why you don't like it. But the fact that he didn't predict this stuff doesn't mean that the book isn't valid. My only criticism was not in David Faber for writing a book. I applaud him for writing a book, but it's the way his colleagues at CNBC were reacting to the book and the things they were saying about the book. And my point was that, wait a minute, I said all this stuff. I wrote a lot of the things that he uncovered after the fact. I wrote about it. I warned CNC about it in my emails, in my appearances, in my books, but not once did any of these guys who were patting Faber on the back ever say anything nice about me. They ever said, hey, Peter, congratulations on Crash Group. You really nailed it. You really got this thing right. You really laid out the problem in the mortgage market. You really were out in front of it on the securitization, on the subprime, on CDOs, on the secondary market, on all the things that I'm sure Faber did a good job of writing about after the fact. I also pointed it out. And I just thought it was a little bit, disingenuous on their part to totally dismiss all the accurate calls I made and just, lavishing nothing but praise on their own guy. And I also thought that most likely, and I haven't read David's book, and I said that, but I'm sure there's not much mention in there of the part that the financial media played in ignoring all this until it was too late. The only thing I think I would take issue with in his book without reading it is the subtitle, which is How Greed and Stupidity Wreck Capitalism. And it wasn't greed and stupidity. It was government. It was the Fed that wrecked capitalism and that are wrecking capitalism. It was Fed policy that allowed greed and stupidity to run amok. If the government hadn't intervened, if Alan Greenspan hadn't gotten everybody drunk, they wouldn't have acted so stupid. Now, I don't know if Faber points this out at all in his book. I hope he does, but I don't. But anyway, again, if people can go back on Amazon and just take off those negative reviews. You just erase it. And, I felt bad when I saw it, and I know some people's, maybe your heart was in the right place, but I think if you stop to think, it's not a fair criticism, of David. Anyway, this is Friday. I'm going to have a nice relaxing weekend. I hope if you can hear it's thundering, and lightning outside of my house. We haven't had a nice, summer weekend all year so far here in New England. Hopefully that changes over the weekend. I'd love to take my boat out on Saturday. I haven't even used it once this summer. Anyway, that's it for everybody. Take care. Until the next time I blog, so long.